Okay, here we are, Hugh. Once again, we are here for Leadership Uncertain with all kinds of adventures in store. And I thought that, well, right before we went live, you told me you're a glutton for extemporaneous. So I thought I would start us off today with a story that occurred to me as I was talking to another friend early this morning. So here it goes. I was in a canoeing accident, right, on a whitewater river. I found myself out of the boat. I was caught. My ankle caught between two rocks, and so my ankle was under one rock, my calf on top of the next rock, and just enormous weight of water flow coming, from my feet toward my head and pushing me down underwater, and it was really something. Water is heavy, and sometimes we don't recognize how heavy and strong it is. So I was being pushed under by the water, and I was just barely able to get a gasp of breath every little while. And I'd kind of fight up, and I'd get a gasp of breath. And I remember that it occurred to me at one moment in this ordeal while I was trying to wrench my ankle free. I am not going to win this fight. If I keep trying to breathe, like trying to keep my head up, while also trying to free my ankle, which is not working, I am going to become exhausted very soon. And this is all just in the matter of, I don't know if this was 30 seconds or a minute of this. And I recognized I was going to become exhausted, and the water was going to exhaust me, and then I would not be able to get any more breaths, and I would just stay there, kind of a rag doll in the current. And so, this is not a thought process exactly. I don't know that I had time for a thought process. I remember the decision to surrender to the water and just let it ragdoll me while I was caught, and just conserve my strength. And then with all of the strength that I had after doing that for a little while, then I fought myself, did a sit-up essentially that allowed me to free my ankle. And it was only by the surrender for some time that was, I don't know how long, but longer than was comfortable. The surrender to bide my time, build my strength, because I was only going to have one shot. And taking that one shot and getting myself free. And as you can see, I survived it.
We hope. This could all still be your
Maybe I'm still there right in this moment.
We don't know if eternity is the same as the time dilation of a black hole. And so
Yes.
This is your continued dying moment. That's a story for a bad science fiction movie if you ever want to write one. Wow. As you were talking, I had two memories. One where I was in Sweden with the Air Force, and we went on a whitewater rafting trip, and there were three boats, and two of them were playing games, and they hit the one that I was in, and I was sitting right at the front of the boat, and when the two boats hit, the back of our boat went up in the air, and when it came back down, I was in the water. And this was in near the Swedish Arctic. So my life was in danger in that water for the time that I was in it, and I was just in my uniform. But that's not the story I'll tell you. The story I'll tell you is the one where it was my first solo flight. I was in Kitty Hawk. No, it wasn't Kitty Hawk. It was Fort Pickett in Blackstone, Virginia. There's an old Army base there that I think it's been renovated a few times, but back then it was not. And there's an airfield there that the Air Force basically trains aspiring cadet pilots to fly. And I was one of the people that got into the National Flight Encampment that year. And I remember after all week really struggling and getting to the point where I was starting to feel confident and competent with my instructor, I remember we went out for a flight that morning, and we went around the airport, we went around the local community, and then we landed right on the on the runway. And he says, "Okay, let's do it." And he just gets out, and he gets on the radio, and he says, "All right, take it up. You're going for 3 rounds around, touch and go twice, and then bring her in. Good luck." And I think I was 18. And I'm like, all right, well, I did not expect that. We did not have a conversation about this is the moment that I'm about to solo in this airplane for the first time, where I'm flying by myself for the first time. And so I revved it up, and I do all the things I'm supposed to do. It's been 20 something years now. So, well, more like 30 something years now, but let's not do that. And, and, away I go, I take off, basically circle the airport with the flight pattern that we're supposed to practice. I land the first time. It's a little dicey, but it's supposed to be a touch and go takeoff. So I land, after going through all the procedures, and then I turn up all the gyros and the dials to take the plane back up. And so there's base is the leg that is parallel to the runway. Final is like you make in this particular airfield, the pattern to land was, consider it like a right box. So you take off, you fly to the right, you fly parallel to the landing path. You turn 90 degrees to be perpendicular to the runway, and then you turn into the runway and land, right? And it's all just rights. So on my second loop, because I've touched down and I've taken off again, and it's my third time around, in coming towards base, I was about 460 feet off, no, 650 feet off the ground, but local elevation was about 125 feet. And so I'm not very far off the ground.
Yeah, that's not a lot of space.
In base, my engine stops midair. I remember the propellers are it's a Cessna XP. It's a Cessna 182 XP Skyhawk, the kind of airplane I was flying that day. And what you'll notice is that at a certain rotation, this is what the propellers look like. They're moving, but they don't look like they're moving that much. And then this one stops. And I'm like, it looks like it's just not moving very fast, but then I realize there's no sound from the engine anymore. And so I'm in base, about to turn into final. I'm literally just hundreds of feet off the ground, and my airplane has just become a glider. And what I remember is I just remember breathing, and it felt like there was an ease that just came over everything.
Mm.
Like the windows and the dials were all covered in a thin coat of ease. And my joints felt really limber. And all of a sudden, the emergency procedures tell you that if something like that happens, you're supposed to flaps to 60 degrees, find a straightaway area to land in, emergency, and just get it done. Like that's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to pivot the airplane or anything like that, but that was not the right answer. And something said, gun for the runway. Go for the runway. So I set my flaps and I took on base with no engine, made the turn. And then I lined up with the runway and then I turned again, lined up with the runway. At this point, I'm losing tons of altitude, but I was managing to hold the plane steady. And I just remembered getting really focused and just calm. I remember looking at the trees. I remember thinking the thought, oh, this is death. Here we are. Here we are. Everything felt right with the world. Like it was just, we're here. And it was now. And if I would have made a mistake and I would have died, it would have been okay. And if I would have done what I needed to do, that would also be okay. And I just remember lining up arguably the most perfect landing that I'd ever attempted up until this point. And as I neared the ground, I totally screwed it up. I was on one wheel and then on another, and then we settled back down, and it was an incredibly violent landing. And the plane came to a stop, and my flight instructor ran over to the plane. I was like, "What happened?" And I was like, "I don't know, but something happened where the engine stopped." And here it was. And I ended up getting my wings, and I ended up being able to solo. And what I don't know that I never actually flew again after that moment by myself. That's not true. I did fly one more time when I was in Sweden, that same trip where I fell in the water. I did fly a jet as a result of getting my pilot's license that year, but I never really followed up on my piloting career because everything that I thought I needed to prove about my desire to be alive had been tested, and I'm good. Yeah. But what was amazing about that whole experience, and this is what your story triggered, was in the moment of crisis, panic would have been fatal. And what was the recipe for success, similar to your comment, was an absolute relaxation into the needs of the moment. This is what is required of this moment. I can only do so much now. I have what I have to do. And if I am going to leave this moment alive, here is what gets to happen. And the other thing that was really calming was that the threat of annihilation provided no more motivation. I was not afraid for my life. I was not afraid to lose anything, which I think was a really important factor. I have a feeling that a lot of times we invite failure when we fear it. And
It's so true.
Yeah. So that was that experience that your story inspired.
Well, and I really relate to the sense of calm I think that you're describing. And I think even in my relating the story just now, as was my experience while being held underwater by tons of water, the thought was not, oh shit, I'm going to die. The thought was, if I am to survive this, this is what is going to be required.
And in my case, I remember there being no thought. I just remembered, oh, that's death. The tops of those trees. Oh, that's
Yeah.
death. Okay, like if I'm here, I'm alive. If I'm there, I'm dead.
Yeah.
I guess the notable, if we're going to analyze it, because I don't know that I did then. This is literally minutes that I'm describing to you.
Yeah.
I realize now that because of course we have to bring in physics and all sorts of science into our casual conversations.
Who's we?
Yeah, I guess it's just me looking for some reassurance. And how does that work?
I don't mind at all. I like physics.
So the idea is that events in a relatively neutral universe, or rather neutral events in a pervasive probabilistic universe, suggest that we assign meaning to things that may not have it. So
Ain't that the truth?
yeah, so the idea is that, who says death death bad, life good? I get it. We have a vested interest in the outcome, so we tend to have a bias. But in the moments where it really matters, it's amazing what's possible in order to keep thinking clear.
Mm.
And I have a feeling, I mean, I've never been in a situation where I've had to decide whether I lived such that someone else died or I would sacrifice my life, but I can imagine that a similar calculus generates where, okay, that's death, and that death is a warranted one. Like it's a worthy one, just because then the calculus is complete, and saving this other person's life is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go, and just
Yeah.
act. And because that's what the car needs to be lifted, or the bear needs to be fought, or whatever it is. Here we go.
Yeah.
And it's funny, we're saying these things, and I realize as I say it out loud, I feel like this is the fabric of courage. Courage isn't beating my chest on a mountaintop and rushing in with bravado. It is a simple, breath-filled decision to move ahead with clarity and effectiveness. And it
Yeah.
is usually just very quiet and certain.
Yeah. And as you were starting to say what it is for you, I was imagining courage as a simple pivot from an attention on fear or threat, a simple pivot from attention on fear to attention on purpose.
Yes.
Right? It's just that turning of the attention. What I didn't tell you is I before we came on, I always think, what am I going to title today's episode, and knowing, okay, I'm going to begin with this story that I was reminded of this morning, and one of the things that it I hesitate to say illustrates, one of the questions that it brings up is ambition and surrender, serenity and creation. That's the title of today's episode, by the way.
Okay.
And I was reminded of it because shortly before, I was reminded of being reminded of this story because shortly before we got on today, I had an absolutely wonderful call with a potential client who was referred. It's one of the few times that we've just had somebody who was not the buyer at any point, right? Somebody who just participated in something that we did a couple of years ago, in conversation with a friend who shared about the challenges that they're having and said, "Oh, you know what we did a few years ago, and you need to maybe talk to these folks." And just a wonderful conversation that we had about the state of her business today, and how we might or might not be able to help, and just what one of the things that I have been afforded by being in a role that requires sales is the grace of learning to detach from the outcome, step into service, and see what happens.
That's funny to me. Yes, yesterday I had a phone call, a sales call. Now, it was a very curious day because I did not, for the first time in a while, I didn't have any project work I had to do. the finance team kind of left me alone. I had some projects I had to work on my own, and I saw that my sales director was about to take a sales call herself, and I was like, well, let me just go mosey into that sales call. So I'm just gonna stay quiet and just sit there. And so I snuck in. I lurked in. It was probably 15 minutes into the call, and she was struggling. She was struggling with this particular set of folks, and they were very hostile. They were not as hostile to her, but they were hostile to the people that referred them to us,
Mm,
who were also on the phone.
mm.
And I think she may have talked for 10 minutes. I did not make my presence known. And then at some point, she recognized that I was there, and there were some technical challenges for which I believed I could weigh in, as the customer kind of, the prospect kind of hammered her with certain questions. And one of the questions was, well, what if we just did this ourselves? And what if we just didn't need you? And I kind of stepped in and I said, that sounds amazing. Please, if you have the time and the bandwidth, I recommend you do this yourself. This is how I did it. You guys are smart enough, clearly. Please, let's go. However, if you can't afford to miss your go live 4 times like I did, and if you can't afford all these terrible things that happen to me, then you may want to consider writing the check and let's not have this conversation anymore. Otherwise, I welcome your addition to the experience in the ether. And I think you can do this, and maybe you should.
And knowing you, Hugh, there's I think uh, you are a better leader and salesperson than you are an actor. And because if I had been on the call and you sounded the way you just did, I think I would have taken great offense. Because there's a certain sound of snark coming across right now that I would bet was not
I
there.
was not there. No,
Right?
sir. I was being
This
completely
was
authentic.
yes, right,
Yes,
and in a way that
absolutely.
doesn't convey while
No,
you're talking to me
no. Telling the
right
story
now.
is not nearly as powerful as being there in that moment. And
Yeah.
I was being truthful. I was
Yes.
saying, hey, you guys are asking great questions. You know what? You're right. If you have
You
the time
can
to go
do
do
this.
this, this is my story. You can have my experience, and you will be great at this. However, recognize that these are the risks that you're taking.
Right.
And we've built a business over the last 10 years so that you don't have to take these risks if you don't want to. But understand, by virtue of the fact that you're having the conversation now, you're already in a better place than we ever were. Welcome to the community. How can I be of service?
Right.
That was the space.
And so there's in this place in my business where it's not like we're flush. We're doing fine.
Right.
We don't need this client. We
Yes.
sure need some clients,
Yes.
right?
I get
But
you.
we
Yes.
don't need this client. And the personal freedom that exists in being able to say with no snark whatsoever, I don't need you, and therefore I don't have any need from you. That while I can hold the ambition of growing my business and doing better this year than we did last year, and creating new service lines, all the kinds of things that I have ambitions to do, to simultaneously surrender to the moment and whatever it may bring, um, it is a strange paradox and a fun one to learn to embrace.
As you were saying that, I was smiling at the very thought because I know for me, I have to set vision. My team requires it of me. Yesterday I had to present the results of the last quarter, and then what's going to happen in this quarter, and what services we're releasing, and what we're cutting back on, and what to get excited about, and how that's going to affect sales, and how we're already improving sales, and blah blah blah. And then I have to flush my soul clean of all of that going into a sales call.
Mm.
because nothing stops or kills sales dead like being drenched in something that looks like ambition or desperation,
Mm.
and both are lethal. I
Yeah.
was going to say something else to you about that. I would tell you that meeting clients. Here's what I was going to share with you. Simon Sinek and Start With Why was a really helpful book in that he sets the premise that we are not on the hunt for sales. I'm going to paraphrase this terribly, so forgive me. He says we're not on the hunt for sales. What we are on the hunt for are folks that understand and are congruent with our why.
Mm.
And when that whole part of the book gave me permission to be my most idiosyncratic.
That's that really makes a lot of sense.
So now I was like, you know what? To hell with needing sales. I'm just not going to
Mm.
do it anymore. I was done. I was done 5 years ago because I decided, you know what? We're already migrating data. Life is boring enough as it is. Let's have some fun on these calls. So I'll say things like, well, you know, I'm supposed to be selling you something. So please understand these are my opinions and this is why they're biased. But if I weren't biased, here's what I would tell you. Saying things like that just makes it, you know, you watch the customer chuckle or whatever. And truth be told, fortunately, I have a sales director in my life where I don't have to be concerned with whether or not I don't even stick around for the reading of the terms and the negotiating a price or any of that stuff. If it happens, it happens. People get it or they don't get it. What's nice is I just get to tell the story. I get to find who is congruent with that story. I get to discover what they want to say
Mm.
because I asked the question. You know my question. How may I make your world a better place to live?
Mm.
And it sometimes jumps into business, or sometimes they talk about their cats, or sometimes and it really doesn't matter because in that moment, I get to be alive. I get to connect with another human being. And for just a sweet second, we get to be human beings having an experience, and then the context can rush in and take over.
Mhm.
And for me, at this point in my career, that almost feels like it's more meaningful than anything else. And then we'll figure out how to make money and do the work and give you a great experience and have you be one of our, you know, raving fans. That's kind of the structure. But the rest of it, at this point, I like it. You know, the idea is that yes, there is the inspiration of ambition that begins the context, but once you have that already in the ether, you don't have to keep carrying that bucket of water. Then you get to just be there and be whatever the moment requires. If the moment requires me to be an expert on SQL,
Mm.
then okay, that's what I'm going to show up as. If the moment requires me to be an expert in migration, I had a VAR who was on a call with me say, you know what? I need you to record a voice message for my son because last night while we were at church, he cursed in Sunday school. And I need him to know that that's not okay. So within an hour and a half of the close of the call, had my voice message. I made a recording for the little boy. Don't know his name, but I said, you know what? Your mom told me that you said a bad word in church, and you may want to consider not using that language because it makes people unnecessarily excited. So let's explore different ways of communicating, and your mom loves you very much.
That's excellent.
And I sent the message. I have no idea whether she listened to it or not, but my commitment was to be my word, and she asked for a message. That's what she told me would make her world a better place to live, and that's what I executed on.
That's
Because you never know what you're going to get.
that's a wonderful story. And I don't remember exactly how you put it. You said something about being able to respond appropriately to the moment.
Yes. Be who the moment needs you to be.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Dan Pink's some of Dan Pink's work, where you know he refers to all of this research that that shows that when there is a financial incentive for solving problem X, we become very bad at solving problem X. Whereas if we're solving problem X simply for the joy of the solving the problem, we are much more creative. We can think, outside of the proverbial box much more readily. And there's something about that greed and hunger for the reward that gets our executive brain really highly engaged, and it is really good at shouting down the creative. And we get, I think he calls it something like object fixedness. And so in the example that he uses, there's a particular puzzle that requires you to recognize that the cardboard box that's holding all the thumbtacks could be a solution if you were to just dump out the thumbtacks and use it not as a container for the thumbtacks, but as something else. And if there's no monetary incentive, that potential solution becomes very easy to see for people and small groups of people.
I'll tell you what that means to me. So I don't know. I have more to think about now to see where we could be disabusing our staff by having things hang over their heads that could be diluting their focus. But in the meantime, one of the things that matters to me greatly is right now we're processing, we probably have 160 plus companies that we're doing our kind of work to right now. And we have a stand-up call list every day that starts with, here are the most critical projects that have to have progress on them to get them to a billable event. So we've reorganized our world to say, hey, here are the things that have to happen for us to be in a place where we can contractually bill for our services on these projects. And those are the first ones that get any kind of attention. However, we do not ever put the price of what any of those milestones are worth.
Oh, that's cool.
Because what I never want is for us to give preferential treatment to any project based on what it can pay us. Because I have learned that even if a customer is representing a small project, what we can learn or how we can deliver an experience for that customer can turn into a legend. So there's a reason I use that word. Another term when I introduce my sales director is I call her my keeper of legends when I introduce her to customers sometimes. And so when we may have a project that may have only paid a few $1,000s, but that customer experience or that testimonial or that reference or the use case document that's created or the soundbite that they create for us becomes the thing that generates way more than the deal ever did. So just because we have a small ticket doesn't mean that we can't have a huge fan that gets generated out of the result, which is why I don't care if you're, a tiny deal or you're a behemoth hedge fund. You are going to get the best of who we are by default.
I dig it. So I think we've given a fair amount of attention to this ambition and surrender part of the title. What we haven't talked as much about, conceivably, is the serenity and creation part of this title. And it was kind of an intuitive addition, that second bit for me. And one of the things that comes up for me around I'm a very creative person. I've always been creative. I'm a theater director by training, and I had an article written about me when I was 8 by somebody in a parenting magazine because of my kind of creative ability to just see the situation and make some creative play, not play in the theater sense, but uh, some way of using what's around me.
Yeah.
And so this serenity and creation side of this, in some ways, to me, really maps over the ambition and surrender, because for some reason, I have the thought that were I to experience serenity, I would feel no need for creation. And not that I've never experienced serenity, and I think that there is something, at least in my experience so far, that I create in order to address something that is different from serenity.
So the reason you saw me react, I guess I was struggling with the construct of your sentence, as I normally do. I struggle with many constructs of your sentences, not because not because I judge them or assess them to be wrong. I just assess them to be challenging. So here's what comes up for me, because the very first thing you said was how this business was created, the business I'm in today.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I think I don't remember if I shared with you how we came to do this work.
Yeah, I remember you, as I recall, had a whole bunch of data to transport to transition from one platform to the next.
Yes.
And it sucked.
Well, not only did it suck, I was stuck because I made a whole bunch of promises to a whole bunch of people that I couldn't keep, because my capabilities and the capabilities I assumed of the system that I was adopting just didn't meet the needs of the moment. And we were defaulting on loans and couldn't make reports happen. And, my staff was about to quit. And I remember that I was about to lose everything that I had worked for up until that moment. And I'd missed my go live 4 times. I mean, these are things that were just nightmarish. And I remembered there was a night where I was like, this is it. If I don't do something different, everything is going to come down. And then I remember getting really curious about the assignment that I had to fill out these templates. And so I just kept working and kept being curious and settled in. And somehow within a 48-hour period of the worst of it, I managed to get 4 years of one of the entities conveyed and done out of the 13 I had. And then it was such a success that I tried to replicate it 12 times. And by the following Friday, it was all done. But the truth was, it was all done by the following Tuesday. I just didn't realize I did it wrong. So I had to do it again, the whole thing, the following week. That's the story that's the part.
So you did it twice.
I did it twice in the period of time. And what was born was a brand new process that would go on to help thousands of businesses that we've served over the last couple of 10 years. And so I'm very familiar with the relationship between serenity and creativity and creation. And for me, I would argue you don't create for. Like, the most pure format of creation for me is an emanation of the pure. And what do I mean by that? Like, I write poetry. I used to write plays. I don't know if I told you that. My whole family used to be performing in plays, and we would write poetry and we would sing and a bunch of other things that we pretend to be talented about. And it was always from a place of the bottom of a slow breath. that the next inspired thing would come. And so I would tell you that my purest creations have always come from the silence, from the deepest of silence.
Mm.
And when I talk about creation and when I think about creativity, what I mean is not a rehashing of that which has come before, but rather the assembly of something with an inspiration that is absolutely second order, like non-linear to whatever could have existed prior. And the serenity is required, I would tell you. And I don't want to present it as if it's a linear process. You get quiet and then you start creating stuff. I have a real issue with that kind of causal thinking.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, Lothar Schaefer writes a really great book called Infinite Potential. And the whole idea about the nature of an infinite field is that the field itself is 0 point information. The idea is that there is this unmanifested field of information from which things that are valuable will emerge.
Okay, so now you've got another story brewing in me,
All right.
because I recognize what you're talking about, and I remember directing a play.
Okay.
Wonderful play, Trestle at Pope Lick Creek. Takes place in the Depression, under a railroad trestle. The trestle and the railroad play heavily, and I remember thinking, okay, like I've got the visual world sorted out. I've got my report ready for the set designer. I've got my report ready for the costume designer. I've got my report ready for the lighting designer. What is going to be the auditory world of this play? We're going to have to figure out music. What is it going to be? And I remember kind of thinking hard about what is the music going to be. And I remember the album cover of Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation appeared in my mind. And I thought, yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful album. That rock and roll. I've got to figure out this Depression era. Like, what is the music of this going to be? What is, and it kept rising and I kept shoving it aside because it didn't even occur for me as an answer to the question and a bad answer to the question. It was just a distraction. Until I finally said, all right, like maybe if I listen to this album, it'll get out of my head and make space for what's the answer. And it's a wonderful album. Absolutely recommend it to anybody who might be watching. And then I hear the creaking of a swing. And then a few licks of a slide guitar. And then this absolutely fantastic harmonica comes in and layers over top of the slide guitar. And so when we got an audience, there were these two guys dressed like hobos sitting under the bridge, one of them with this beautiful American steel guitar and another with this harmonica and these old style microphones. And goddamn, if that wasn't the best friggin' song for this play.
Yes.
Not only is it era appropriate, mood appropriate. Oh Lord, won't you lie on the track-a-lacka? It is about a railroad track. Absolutely fantastic. A very unserene need, calling this very serene emergence into my mind of the answer that in my lack of serenity I refuse to accept.
And you raise a really great point. And what I've come to appreciate is, this is going to sound a little weird, I have come to love bad ideas. Like,
so have I.
Terrible ideas.
Yeah.
Terrible ideas. Because what gets to happen is if it's not this one, it'll usually give birth the beautiful thing is never
Yeah.
forget the power of fertilizer, right?
Right.
So even if it's a crappy idea, you have no idea what it will fertilize to actually grow something worth a damn.
Right. One of my favorite phrases, and we use it in our training. What I like about that idea is, right. And one of the examples that I give, is the problem is air on submarines gets stale,
Mm.
right? And so somebody suggests let's put a screen door on the submarine.
Okay.
Absolutely terrible idea. And you can say of that idea, what I like about that idea is it allows air from the outside to come in, and maybe we can build on that.
Exactly. And what's curious to me is that, creativity, I think there's a lot of mythology around creativity
Mm.
because I've been blessed that I learned about a fella by the name of Jon Snow early in my life. Are you familiar with the name? Not the well,
Not from Game of Thrones, I take it.
and I sadly I know I'm about to get a lot of hate if anybody's actually watching this, but I have not seen Game of Thrones. I think I
I've
made
only
it
seen the
5 minutes.
season, but I read a lot of it.
I got 5 minutes into the first episode and I just couldn't do it. So
Yeah.
anyway, the Jon Snow I'm thinking about is famous in that he was the first person to use anesthesia and not kill a patient.
Mm.
And one of the people that he was able to operate on was a Queen of England. This was back in the 1830s. And he was a botanist and he collected butterflies and he was able to figure out that the cholera epidemic in London was caused by drinking water. The drinking water, where the pervasive dogma at the time from the Public Health Administration was that it was bad air. It was bad air.
Bad air. Yeah.
He was able to correlate mathematically the density of deaths that were happening to the availability of drinking water that also happened to be right next to where people were throwing out waste.
Yes. Yeah, I remember reading about this now.
So it is a fascinating book about the man who figured it out. Now, what he employed was a technique that you can read about. It's called the consilience of inductions. And I realize that it's how I've been learning since I was 13 years old. The idea behind the consilience of inductions is that if you understand an operating principle about one system, it is possible with caution to create deductions about how other systems can work from the same very elemental precepts. So what he would do is he would learn about chemistry from botany. He would learn about physics from chemistry. He would learn about math and so he would make all of these modeling assumptions that would allow him to then go learn more about those other areas without starting from scratch.
And so I'm imagining this has parallels like with understanding traffic through fluid dynamics.
Correct. So one of the things that really supported me is I also studied mechanical engineering, which ended up at the graduate level being the study of everything, how everything moves and how energy transfers through the universe. And there are continuum mechanics and how different jump laws exist about any kind of matter transformation through any medium. So these are the things that they had us thinking about. But I had been learning about that since I was 13. So this was just kind of the trajectory that made sense. Here's why I'm bringing this up. It lends itself to creativity because all of a sudden the entire world as a palette becomes your idea sphere. So if you are not able to find the solution to your problems in one place, chances are there is some system somewhere else that has spent the last 100 years mastering
something has solved this problem.
So you start there and you begin to explore. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to hit my brain with all sorts of things that confuse, confound, and frustrate me. So
That's why I'm your friend.
well, well, to be honest, you do more good than harm. So, so you'll know that I will take, music lessons, and I will take dance lessons, and I will take math, and I'm learning Spanish, and I'm trying to basically understand coding, and I'm constantly reading about other industries, so that way I am inviting all sorts of ideas that can have structural similarities. So when I get hit with a problem, I recognize, oh, this is an opportunity to explore how to solve X, but recognize that the master's degree from college, the thing we learn how to do, I used to make fun that in engineering school, a bachelor's degree teaches you how to solve a problem. A master's degree teaches you how to solve a class of problems. So you create mental models for how to solve anything that shows up with these particular characteristics. It's one of the things I got good at. So the pattern recognition from, say, learning how to trade or learning how to deal with cryptocurrency hashes, like all of that stuff is all swimming around in there, all following a systematic series of rules for which you can draw for almost anything that you want to do. So I think the idea that creativity is just out of the blue, no, it's something that you build and practice and push, and you need to have crushing problems that push you through a cycle of powerful diffidence and depression if you'll have it. Like, it's useful too. So like all of that works, and the only thing that acts like battery acid to the process of being able to have really great flows of bad ideas, which is another name for creativity, is ego. Is to know that I am, insert limiting belief here.
Or that I must be and am not, which is, by the way, just the other side of the same damn ego coin.
Just as bad, right?
Yeah.
I am not, or any sentence that can reduce confidence and reduce clarity of thought. Anything that does those two, that have those two outcomes, is usually a sign that you have invested in a narrative about how you see yourself that blocks you off from field point potential. This is the stuff that Lothar Schaefer writes about in his book, where the entire creativity of the universe is available to you if you give yourself permission to go play. And that's the fun part. Is, a lot of times I'll be in business meetings and I'll say, well, what would the answer be if you had to pretend to be 6 years old? I ask that question all the time because I play that game all the time. And my best days are the days where I get to pretend to be 5 years old. Well,
the thing about play, and I think we should probably wrap up here shortly. The thing about play is, I think it's for me one of the things that bridges ambition with the power of surrender. Is that play allows me to surrender and I get to kind of load my brain with the ambition and then leave it behind and let the play surrender to the play of things and let things happen.
I would also tell you that it would be the glue that also pieces the serenity and the creation together.
Big time.
Because I know for me, the tinkering is the best part.
There's so much pleasure in tinkering and failing. I can think of various inventions of mine where here's the complex problem. Let me put this thing together that allows me, for example, to drop a key from my balcony to myself on the ground when I've locked myself out of my third floor apartment. Right, and that's a complex problem, and to find all of the solutions to each incremental, and then take actual delight in it failed, and I can see just how it failed, and what am I going to do now? It's the tinkering is just a pleasurable experience. when you've got faith that your creativity will carry you through.
Oh well, it's and here's where I'll challenge you. I'll tell you when you don't have faith that your creativity will take you through. That's even a more fun experience.
All right.
You know?
Well, let's leave it at that. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. Hugh, as always, it's a pleasure to spend an hour with you.
No worries, my friend. Appreciate you as always.